Welcome to Judge of Characters. Welcome to Judge of
Okay, welcome in everybody. Welcome. We're going to be live in 8 minutes and 34 seconds, and I do have a really special treat for you tonight. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Gil Carvalho tonight, who is a nutrition scientist, and he is amazingly knowledgeable, and he's going to answer all of our questions regarding nutrition, diet, and I'm excited to talk with him. So make sure that you go ahead and get yourself ready. Go ahead, share the video, share it to your timeline, tag somebody, and get any and every question that you can think of that is poignant and that you have burning inside of you that really needs the answers of, because we're going to ask him a series of questions that I had on my heart and mind that I really wanted to know about vegan diets and meat eating, etc. So if you have questions, make sure that you gather them up. We're going to be live in 7 minutes and 45 seconds. final song before the video starts. Come on, you know the lyrics, but you know I'm not going to say them, but you know the lyrics. Go ahead. All right, 34 seconds. Hey, all right. You know, we're not going to do too long of an intro because we've had our guest waiting for a really long time. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the introductions without further ado. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You know, I am your host, Tanya TKO, but let's get live on these other platforms first, and then we're going to bring our guest on. We're live on LinkedIn. We are live on Twitter. And we are live on Facebook. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, so, our camera is out of spec. Let me get this right. We did our test yesterday, but I don't know what happened. Let me get this right for you all. Give me 1 second, Gil. I'm sorry. No
problem.
All right. Oh, it has, I don't know what it's done to the perspective of your face. Let's see, there's another one right here. So we'll use this one. All right, let me make this a little bit smaller. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome, 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 welcome. I'm excited to bring our guest to you today. Gil, say hello to everybody.
Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing?
All right, wonderful. All right, so let me just go ahead and tell you all who Gil is and what we're doing tonight. So, remember, I just came back in from my 40-day healing retreat, and I had adopted a vegan diet lifestyle. Along the way, I did 30 days of juicing and then 7 days of reintroducing to food, and then the transition 3 days back home. So we did 40 days altogether. And a lot of you had questions about oils, fats, sugars, vegan versus meat eating diet, and questions that were outside of my scope to be able to answer. So what I did was I found a brilliant doctor, an MD and PhD, to come and speak to us. Let's tell you a little bit about Gil. If you go to truehealthinitiative.org, you'll be able to find out more about him. This is his bio right here. And as you see, He's a scientist into genetics and molecular biology, nutrition science, and neuroscience. Not only that, he's also an author and has published several peer-review. Is it books or articles? Come, let me bring Gil back. Come,
Articles.
Gil.
Yeah, papers. Articles.
Papers. Okay, perfect. All right. So, Gil, I'm so happy to have you here to answer the questions. We had a little bit of technical difficulties when we first came in, so we had to restart, but we are back and let's jump right into it. Why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, born and raised in Portugal, half Portuguese, half Brazilian, went to medical school in Portugal as well, and then moved to the US to go to grad school and worked in California as a research scientist for almost 20 years, doing work in all the fields that you mentioned. Did some work in nutrition in grad school, and then stuff in neurobiology, molecular biology, all that good stuff. And then about 4 years ago, we started creating content on nutrition for a general audience, mainly on YouTube, on our channel, Nutrition Made Simple. But we put out some content on Twitter as well, and we got some stuff on Facebook. But YouTube is our headquarters. Let's say it's our home base, and the goal is basically to clarify some of the confusion.
People are saying there's a problem with the audio. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry. I don't know what's this.
No problem.
Hold on.
Somebody said I can hear fine. Ashley
Really?
B.
I'm just gonna just to make sure that everybody can hear. Technology. Nothing is foolproof nowadays. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so people said that they could hear fine. I don't know why some people were saying they had an audio issue. Tell those people to refresh. I'm sorry, go right back to where you were saying. You said that you started making videos and YouTube is your main platform.
Yeah, so we put out about a video every week on different questions that people have on nutrition. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty around nutrition and dietary questions. And so we try to break down some of the concepts and try to dispel some of the confusion around a lot of these common questions that people have with foods: what's healthy, what's not, how do we know what's reliable information and what's confusion. So those are our main topics of interest.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. You know, what I want to do is I have a few questions that I gave you before the broadcast, and I want to jump into let's jump into vegan diet versus meat eating diet versus omnivore. Are there certain blood types that should eat different diets, or tell us more about that?
There's very little research on associating blood type with diet. There's some studies on it, but they don't really support a very strong link between blood type and different diets. So there are different reasons that one might want to go more plant focused or introduce some animal foods into the diet or not, but not really evidence based pertaining to blood type. No. There's not a lot of research supporting the idea that blood type is a major determinant of health effect of foods.
So that guy who wrote the book,
yeah,
it's type.
Yeah. It's most of the research has not supported it, and a lot of the studies point in the opposite direction, that it has no effect. So they've done studies specifically looking at people on different diets and different blood types, and there's no correspondence. So people will do better on certain diets, but irrespective of their blood type, right? So there's no robust science supporting that idea.
Wow. Well, you know, I'm stunned to hear that, because this man has the whole book and people live by that. And so when you say that the science doesn't support it, which science are you looking at?
Different studies that have looked specifically at the health effects of different foods in people in different blood types, and there was no correspondence with those associations that they talked about in the book. You know, they looked specifically at the matches that they suggest in the book, and it just doesn't pan out in most of the well-conducted, well-structured studies. And some actually point in like the opposite direction. So
Wow.
at least with the information we have, with the research that has been done, choice of foods is crucial for health. It just doesn't seem to have, blood type does not seem to be a major factor for the decision.
Well, so how could a person write an entire book saying that instructing people on this? He has an entire series of books. How could anybody do that?
Welcome to my world. A lot of the popular books out there, not all, I mean, I'm not trying to paint this with a broad stroke, but a lot of the popular books don't have a lot of scientific substance. That's just, unfortunately, that's the reality. And a lot of times the most popular books are often the ones with the least scientific substance that are not particularly evidence-based. So this is a source of frustration for a lot of professionals that work in nutrition and a lot of health professionals, because these books obviously get a lot of traction and a lot of exposure and confuse a lot of people. And one of the things we try to do is precisely address these common questions and try to give people a bit of a framework of how they can make sense of information and what can be reliable and what can't, and how to find information that's how to fact check things for themselves.
I'm glad that you just said that, because that is the next question. How do people figure out which information is right? How do they fact check? How do they know which information is right for the 3 different bags? If you could explain the 3 bags to people, and then jump into how do they know?
Okay, so the 3 bags that you're referring to is basically a visual that we came up with to try to explain that not all evidence is created equal. Some types of studies weigh more than others. So we've all heard this idea on social media that there's a study for anything to support any idea you want, right? One day eggs are good, the next day eggs are bad, and people say, oh, science doesn't matter, because basically any idea you want, you can find a study to back it up. Yes, you can find individual studies that seem to point in almost any given direction, but the trick is to look at what we call totality of evidence, or preponderance of evidence. It's really the balance of evidence, right? Looking at the majority of things and which direction they consistently point in. And so the idea of the 3 bags is exactly to try to dispel a little bit of the confusion. So basically, one bag is things like lab experiments in animal models, like in mice or in test tubes or in cell culture. That's what we call mechanistic research. Then the second bag and the third are in humans. So you can already tell the second and the third are probably going to weigh a little bit more, and that's actually the case. Second bag is what we call observational research. So you just look at populations and what they're already doing, what they're already eating, and you look for a correlation between what they eat and their health outcomes. And then the third one are clinical trials, which are more robustly structured. So you take volunteers, you split them randomly, you ask them to eat different things, and you look at the health consequences. Okay. So basically, it's a little bit of a ladder, right, where the confidence that we have in the findings goes up a little bit from step to step. And in practice, it gets a little more complicated, but this is kind of an attempt to simplify it for people to get a glimpse of how that works.
So the 3 different bags are experimented on animals. The second is population studies, like looking at Asia and what they eat and how it has affected their health, right? And then the third one are actual clinical trials, where you take people, give them a specific diet, then test their blood work or their health markers, et cetera. And then you know which research is the most powerful, which is the third one, the clinical trials on actual humans.
Yes, that's basically, everything else being equal, the third one wins. In practice, sometimes they ask complementary questions, and you do end up looking at everything. So we don't dismiss any of the bags, but if there's contradiction between the bags, in general, the clinical trial is going to have more weight, is going to give a little bit more confidence as far as finding cause and effect than the observational or the experiments in animals or in test tubes.
Okay, well, you know what? I'm glad you said that, because I got into an argument with a family member about lectins. And I remember you did a video about lectins. And so I was telling my family member, I was like, what you're saying about lectins may come from being studied on animals. But I was saying this, but I wasn't really sure how to know. You know what I mean?
Yes. So you're absolutely right. A lot of the research on lectins that points to harm comes from research in cell culture, for example. So throwing the purified lectins on cells and observing detriment on these cells. But the problem is always this logical leap from those observations to then concluding that eating a food that contains lectins is going to be detrimental for a human. And that's a massive logical leap. So what you want to do is you want to look at people consuming foods that are richer in lectins, like legumes, like nuts and beans and lentils and things like that, and tomatoes and other eggplant, all these things that contain lectins, and look at how healthy they are. And what you see overwhelmingly is positive outcomes of consuming these foods, as long as there's no underlying issue or intolerance. For most people, for most healthy people, eating these foods improves health.
But my question is, as a layperson, how do I know whether or not something that somebody is telling me is from animal testing, population testing, or double-blind studies? How do I know?
Right. So, yeah, you basically the first step is to ask for evidence, right? And this is a crucial mindset. Is we're exposed to all these claims on social media, and this counts. I'm basically making claims here, so you'd want to see the evidence for any claim that I'm making, right? And the same with my videos. So you watch my videos and I make a specific claim. Now I show the studies on screen and they're all linked. Somebody says, he's lying. See?
You know what? That's one of the people who was arguing me down about meat eating. And so when we get to the B12 question, I really want you to direct this outward. Listen, this person is the scientist and the professional. Carnivore baby, please prove what you're saying. My goodness.
The main theme in my channel is to promote healthy skepticism. So when people disagree, I have no problem with disagreement. I like disagreement, right? Our enemy is indifference, is when people are eating what Dolly Parton used to call the seafood diet. I see food and I eat it. People are not thinking about their health. And then we have the health problems that we have in our society. So people disagreeing and people challenging, I love it. That's what we talk about in our channel.
Right, but where do we go? Is there like a book? Is there a website that we go to see whether or not the research is supported? How do I, as a layperson, find this? And how does my audience find it?
Right. So the first step is to ask the person making the claims to provide evidence, right? It's the burden of proof is always on the individual making the claims. It's not for us. If somebody makes claims with no evidence, it's not for us to go prove him wrong. Now, second step is, where do you find evidence? So there are specific databases, and one that's very intuitive user interface is Google Scholar. So it's just Google Scholar. It works exactly like Google. It looks like Google, but all it gives you is peer-reviewed research. So we're actually making a video. It'll come out on Monday showing exactly how to do it and how to use it. But it's pretty self-explanatory. You just enter a search with terms. Let's say you have, any condition. There you go. So if you click that first link right there.
Okay, so Google Scholar. Okay.
Yeah,
and then,
right there. So let's say you have any health issue in your family.
Okay,
right?
I'm going to type up lectins.
Okay, great.
All right. So now what do I do?
So each one of those entries is a peer-reviewed study. It could be a review. It could be primary data.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So all of those.
So let me click on this first one right here. And so, oh, wow. All right. They have the abstract. Oh,
exactly.
Okay.
Well, this is exactly what a professional
the
scientist would do.
citations.
Exactly.
Oh, this is perfect. Oh my goodness. You have averted so many arguments with just that alone. Thank you. Thank you. So you hear that Google Scholar, and you can type in whatever it is that you want, and you can look up the information. So perfect. So now let's jump into the big vegan versus non-vegan debate in terms of B12. Talk to us, Gil. Talk to us.
Well, B12 is an essential nutrient, so everybody needs to get it from somewhere. So there are three basic sources. There's animal products, fortified foods, and supplements. All three are effective. It's basically a matter of personal preference. So if people are eating a substantial amount of animal products, they're going to get some B12 from that source. If they're not, if you're on predominantly or exclusively plant-based diet, you need to get B12 from one of the other sources, either fortified foods, which can be fortified cereals, fortified plant milks, some orange juices with B12 as well. And then you have supplements, basically taking a B12 pill, which can be done once a week, covers your B12 needs. 2,000 micrograms a week is all you need, just one pill. It boils down to cents.
So I know that nutritional yeast, the natural unfortified nutritional yeast has B12 in it, correct?
Yeah. The fortified one does. The
unfortified does not?
I believe the unfortified does not, but you should be able to find in the back of in the nutritional composition, you should be able to find the content of B12 for each for each brand.
And then seaweed is supposedly has B12 in it as well, especially according to the talk.
So those I would alert, I would advise some caution, because those sources of B12 are often we'll call it's like a pseudo form of B12. It's not actually functional. So I would not advise using seaweed as your main source of B12. There are some shapeshifters in there. So the three sources that I listed are basically the three recommended ones for reliability. It's animal foods, fortified foods, and supplements.
Really?
Yeah.
From what it is that I heard, fortified foods are that B12 is not translatable.
No, it's fully functional. Yeah, and it's absorbed, and it can be. It's been shown that it's completely functional and it works effective. But there are some caveats. Each one of these three options has some caveats. So for fortified foods, you want to make sure you eat them a couple times a day, because there's a ceiling to the absorption. So we can't absorb a very high amount of B12 all in one sitting. So it could be, for example, eating some fortified cereal at breakfast and then having a cup of fortified plant milk later on with some B12 in it. So that's a better system than just having it once a day. So the fortified route is very possible, very effective, very, very safe, but it does require a bit more planning and a bit more intent. So especially for people who don't want to think about all these things and are lazy like me, whenever I'm eating most phases where I'm eating a lot of plant foods and not getting any B12 from other sources, I try to take a supplement. It's just easier.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What are the natural sources for B12?
It's produced by bacteria in our environment. And so then it's present in animal tissues because the animals consume those bacteria, and then the B12 is lodged in their tissues. That's why it's in meat. It's also produced in our guts, but it's too far down. It's in the colon, so it's no longer absorbed. So bacteria down there produce B12, but we can't get it through that source. And then the B12 in animals comes from the bacteria originally. And the B12 in fortified foods and supplements, that's synthetic. So it's produced, through molecular biology. It's no longer gotten from their natural sources. It's made in laboratory.
How do we find and consume the bacteria ourselves so that we can get natural B12? How do we do that?
It's not really doable. I mean, there's controversy over whether you could get enough from the natural sources, which would be like dirt that comes attached to plants or bacteria in natural water bodies of water like streams. But you don't really want to do that. I mean, it's the balance is not going to be positive. The net effect is not going to be positive. You'd have to eat a lot of vegetables that are unwashed with dirt that comes from pulling them out of the ground, and drink water straight out of streams or rivers or something like that. And even if you do that, I think most of the evidence indicates that you would not get enough because it's a very small amount. So the only natural way to do it is to eat animal products. But even that is very controversial, because for example, a lot of the beef nowadays from factory farms, those animals are given B12 supplements as well, because they're not raised in natural conditions. So they're injected with B12 in order for the meat to have B12 in it. So I know.
Wait a minute.
It's a bit of a mess. But
I have my nori paper right here, right?
what
This
you what?
is my nori paper, my seaweed. This is my seaweed, right?
Oh, okay, all right.
And on here it says it has 1.9 micrograms of B12. But you're saying
Okay.
that these B12s are shapeshifters. Where is
It
that
might
information coming from?
it might not be a functional form. I can send you papers that show that B12 from some of these sources, some of the seaweeds given to people don't rectify their insufficiency of B12. So it's not. I wouldn't recommend that as a main as your main staple. Also, the amount is very low. So because of that limitation that we have, you'd have to eat. That's for what amount of seaweed?
This says one sheet. It says serving size. If I could get it, if you could see, it says serving size one sheet, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then it says it has 80% of the B12 by with 1.9 micrograms. That's what it says on here.
Right. Yeah. That's most of the research indicates that those. I'm not saying that one specifically is for sure not functional, but most of the ones from seaweed are a little tricky. I can send you that literature and you can share it with your.
I'm going to need to look at that because I definitely want to make sure that I'm getting enough B12, and I don't want the synthetic version of it. I want the real version. Okay. There has to be some sort of way to ferment the bacteria. There must be, like in a kombucha or something, or a sauerkraut.
It used to be done that way originally. It's just easier to do it now with molecular biology. It's still real B12. The molecular composition is exactly the same. There's no chemical difference. And the functional tests show that you give that B12 to people who don't have enough B12, and you top up their reserves and their symptoms go away. So the functional test is the highest form of evidence.
All right. Okay.
I know. I
don't want to badger you. I'll move on to the next question.
That's okay.
Intermittent fasting is all the rage right now. And you did a video that said that there's no difference between intermittent fasting and calorie deprivation. But then yesterday during our test, you said that the information has been updated. Talk to me.
Kind of. So there's different types of fasting that people do, different intervals. When you look at most of the evidence, fasting is a viable way to lose weight and to get improvements in glucose metabolism and different metrics. But when they look at how it works, there doesn't seem to be any independent benefit other than the calories. So if you're fasting and via fasting, you eat less calories, you lose weight and you get all those benefits, assuming that you have extra fat mass to begin with. But when they compare it to people who are not fasting but eat the same amount of calories, there's no significant difference between the two. What that means in practice is that fasting is a perfectly valid means of controlling, to keeping your total caloric intake reasonable. So for people who like to fast, I know people who like to do it, who like to integrate fasting into their lifestyle, totally fine and effective way. It's just that we should understand that it's not magic, right? So for people who don't like to fast and for people who don't get results, there are studies on people fasting who are not getting any additional benefit. It's reassuring for people to know that you don't have to. You're not leaving any benefits on the table if you decide, if you prefer not to fast.
What about autophagy?
So autophagy is what we call, this is very good because it piggybacks on what we talked about before. A lot of the research implicating autophagy and intermittent fasting is in animals, in mice, right? So it comes in that first bag of mechanistic research. Now, we know that starving humans activates autophagy, but it's very difficult to show that the activation of autophagy in a human being has a net positive effect. And because these comparisons that I was talking about show no extra benefit of fasting over just caloric control, the most the most likely scenario is that these molecular changes are not doing anything extra. They're not providing any extra benefit, at least nothing substantial that shows up above the benefit of the caloric control. So the bottom line, again, for anybody trying to figure out what they're going to do, I wouldn't worry about autophagy at all. It's just a distraction. It's kind of something that people like to talk about in podcasts and things like that. That kind of sounds sciencey, but it has no relevance for
So let
regular
me just explain
individual.
to people what autophagy is. Autophagy is supposedly the
Sure.
state. Oh, well, why don't you explain it? You're the doctor. Go ahead. You explain
Sure.
autophagy to the people.
Sure. It's a molecular process where it can digest certain components of the cell. For example, in situations where they're no longer needed or they're defective. So it's kind of the garbage disposal process inside the cell. And so it happens in situations of starvation. For example, the body starts digesting some of its tissues for preservation of energy and then prioritization of certain processes. And in mice, it does seem that autophagy specifically provides a benefit. So if you inactivate autophagy, the benefits of fasting go away. But then we have that logical leap that we talked about earlier. And because in humans, unlike in mice, fasting doesn't seem to provide any extra independent benefit per se, the most likely conclusion is that autophagy is not a substantial contributor to the benefits we see with any of these forms of caloric control or weight loss. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but this is heartbreaking. You're breaking my whole heart. Okay. You did say in the video that you did on intermittent fasting that timing of the meals matters.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that real quick.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good reminder. So there is a different modality of fasting that some people, 16-8, it's called, where people eat for 8 hours and then fast for 16. So there's been a substantial amount of research done. And most of the research up to a couple of days ago suggested that there is a benefit to the timing of food, not the fasting per se. So if you fast, the fasting itself is not going to provide a benefit, most likely, but the time at which you eat, the time of day at which you eat, does make a difference metabolically. And specifically, most of the research indicates that eating earlier in the day is a little better for insulin resistance and for glucose metabolism, and even maybe for weight loss. So this is what most of the studies out there indicate. Now, there's this study that you mentioned that just came out like 2 days ago, and it's getting all the headlines in New York Times and The Guardian and everything. And what they did was they put two groups. It's a randomized control trial, so they split randomly the volunteers. Both groups are on caloric restriction. Both groups are obese people, and both are eating a low amount of calories, so 1,500 to 1,800 a day approximately. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, one of the groups is doing this 16-8. So they're only eating during the 8-hour window. And they didn't find any significant additional benefit of that group for that group compared to the group that is just calorically restricting. So what that suggests at face value is that that element of eating earlier in the day doesn't seem to provide any extra benefit in that context. Now, there's a lot of controversy, and people always question these things and say, well, maybe it had to be, a smaller time window, or the control group is eating also kind of in a short time window. There's always these controversies and these discussions that follow the publication of these papers. But this is a large paper that just came out, kind of shaking the foundations of this idea that the circadian rhythm is very important for food. So bottom line for people.
Is the circadian rhythm better or not for our overall health?
Well, here's what my bottom line would be from the evidence that I've seen. The main lever would be the quality of the foods that you eat by far, and total caloric intake, right? So that would be the main concern. So
I could have my nice big salad at midnight and then jump into bed and I'm all right.
Yeah, I would say that if you're going to have your salad at night versus not having it, I would absolutely recommend having it at night. On top of those basic considerations, if people prefer to eat a little bit earlier in the day, I don't see a problem. There might be a benefit to the circadian shifting. It just might not be something so, the magnitude of the effect might not be so strong that it showed up in this trial. So it might be like a secondary minor effect compared to caloric restriction.
I think people are going to come for you, Doc. I think they're going to come for you.
I'm used to it. I have a YouTube channel. I have a thick skin by now.
Because you are rocking several foundations here. I don't know what, man, this is crazy. All right. So question to you. Do we need to eat animal flesh? Do we need animal flesh? That's the big question.
We don't need it. It's not necessary. There's no single food that's necessary. There's essential nutrients, but we can get them from different sources. So basically, a healthy dietary pattern can contain some animal foods or not. It's basically a personal choice. Online, you'll find these two almost artificially polarized views. Some people will say that if you include any animal products in your diet, you're killing yourself. And other people will say that if you don't include animal products, you're killing yourself.
Yeah.
Neither one is really reflected by the bulk of the evidence. You can design a healthy dietary pattern that contains some animal products or not, and there's no clear superiority between two well-designed diets that are that have your fruits and vegetables and they're not exaggerated in ultra-processed foods. One without animal products and one with some. There's no clear evidence of superiority. So it's basically a personal preference as far as health. As far as health, we should make just a distinction that there are externalities to these foods that a lot of times people on predominant or exclusively plant-based diets, they have ethical concerns or they have environmental concerns, and those are very real. But when people ask me, they generally are asking the immediate health effect on the individual eating the foods, and the honest answer based on the data is that there's no clear superiority whether you include some animal products or not. So,
I'm glad you brought that up. God, there's so many. I see you see what the people are saying. I see you see that. But my question,
some of it, I was trying to focus on talking to you because otherwise it's very distracting.
Yeah, no, I bet. So my question about that is, in terms of the diets that help heal people of disease, right? None of those diets that I have seen that are out there that heal people have animal products in them, like the Dr. Sebi's and the and Dr. Gerson and the people who have actually healed people of cancers. They make sure that there are no animal products.
Right. I would be very careful with the claim. I'm not saying that it's you, but in general, any claim of curing cancer with a diet or any disease for that matter requires a careful experiment where you prove that with the control group and all of that, right? Otherwise, it's very tricky to claim reversal of a disease or curing a disease without a structured experiment. But in terms of observing benefits with diets that are rich in plant foods, there's plenty of benefits in the literature. The question is whether they absolutely must be 100% animal free, and that is often a logical leap. There's no evidence that a diet must be animal free in order to be healthy. There's a certain number of boxes that should be checked in general for a health promoting diet, and including fruits and vegetables is a big one. But being 100% animal free is not something that has been convincingly shown in the literature to be necessary. So
what about inflammation?
There's substantial evidence on effects of food on inflammation. There's even an index, a dietary inflammatory index. And yes, it's true that some of these plant foods are generally on the anti-inflammatory list, the leafy greens, the foods that you'd expect. But I look at that type of thing with some caution, with a grain of salt. There is also some data on dietary patterns. So the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet have been shown to generally lower inflammation. One caveat that I always have with studies looking at inflammation is that a lot of times when you take people that are unhealthy and you put them on a healthier diet with fruits and vegetables and low in a lot of processed foods, you see weight loss. Mm-hmm. And weight loss is a big lever for lowering inflammation. So for most of those studies, if you're seeing weight loss, it's very difficult to pin the anti-inflammatory effect on the specific foods that are being given without it being through that weight loss step. Does that make sense? I don't know if that was confusing.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that people who are overweight, who have a lot of fat, have inflammation.
Yeah.
And
carrying excess fat.
Okay.
Carrying excess fat tends to increase inflammatory markers. Yeah.
And that when they lose fat, inflammation decreases. So that on these diets that lower inflammation, it could just be a result of the fat being lowered.
A lot of times in these studies, yes, there's this confounder that is hard to untangle.
Okay, so well then, what about the population study? I think the book was called The Asia or the East or something like that. I forget what the book is called.
China study?
Oh yes, the China study. What about that? Where populations that eat a lot of seaweed, vegetables, starches like rice, and very little fish, that these people are living to be over 100. There are more centenarians in those cultures. They're living longer.
That's
they're
the blue
healthier.
zones.
Huh?
That's the blue zones. Dan Buettner.
What about that? These people are not eating all of these beefs and all this other stuff, and they are living longer, healthier.
Yeah. What that tells us is that that diet is compatible with being a centenarian, but it doesn't establish cause and effect because it's not really a controlled experiment. It's what we call ethnography, looking at an existing population and trying to relate their existing habits with their health outcomes. And so there's the problem is that there's a lot of confounders. Their genetics are going to be different. Their other lifestyle components, their activity, they move around a lot more. And even the study with the blue zones, they identified, I think it was 9 different factors that were in common between these populations. So it's very difficult. It's not really, I wouldn't claim based on the blue zones that the diet itself is pushing them to be centenarians. It's very difficult to make that claim.
Well, but then they brought McDonald's into Asia, and then people started becoming obese, suffering from all of these newfound diseases, etc. When the fast food came in and the standard American diet followed, these people who had typically been centenarians and healthy now have overhanging bellies, knee aches, brain fog, obesity. The children are obese now. They got the children outside doing jumping jacks. What are your thoughts on this? Because it's not like their genetics stopped them from having these issues once the standard American diet came in.
Sure. Genetics alone are not going to be the full picture. And we have evidence that abundant evidence that ultra processed foods induce overconsumption, tend to favor people gaining more weight, increasing inflammation, increasing disease risk. So all of that is very plausible. It's supported by the evidence in general. Okay. I think it's the logical leap that a lot of times is used in, for example, people argue we should be vegans because the blue zones show largely plant-based diets and these people are centenarians. It's not that it's necessarily wrong. It's that it's not a very strong argument, right, for veganism. It's an ancillary argument for eating fruits and vegetables, for eating a plant-rich diet. But we have stronger arguments for that, which are the bulk of the evidence, randomized controlled trials, and carefully designed epidemiological studies that have less confounders in them. So they allow for more confidence when it comes to cause and effect.
Do you know who Dr. John McDougall is? Well, thank you for answering that. Do you know who Dr. John McDougall is?
I've heard of him. I've seen things but I don't know a lot about him. No.
So Dr. John McDougall has a practice in California, I believe it is. He has people come there and he puts them on a starch diet. And he says that human beings are naturally starch eaters, and that when we eat what is natural to us, that we start getting in alignment, health-wise. Your face, what's going on?
No. I've heard the argument of the ancestral diet from every dietary camp on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard vegans say we should be vegans because our ancestors ate a lot of animals, ate a lot of plants. I've heard people who like to eat a lot of animals saying the opposite. We should eat a lot of animals. We should eat piles of meat because our ancestors ate a lot of meat. I've heard, obviously, the paleo diet is completely predicated on this idea that we should eat what our ancestors ate. And then we have now starch promoters saying we should eat starch because ancestors.
Yeah.
The problem with the argument with ancestor diets is, well, there's a few problems. One is that there was enormous variation between what our ancestors ate, depending on the availability, depending on where they lived and when they lived. They ate what they could grab. If you live in the wild, you can't shop at Vaughn's, so you eat whatever you can grab to not die of starvation. And this varied significantly depending if you lived in the tropics or in somewhere where it's all ice. The other issue is that the evidence, the paleontology and anthropological evidence is very limited. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the precise composition of the diets. But the main limitation is that there's a massive logical leap between knowing what our ancestors ate and knowing what is healthier for us long term. There is no necessary link between what our ancestors were eating and what minimizes disease risk long term for us in 2022. A food can be great for surviving in the wild and for getting us past childhood and adolescence and again getting us to reproductive age, and then not protect us from heart disease or Alzheimer's or cancer in our 50s, 60s, and beyond, which is our main concerns nowadays.
Okay.
At least in the West, right?
Okay.
So the argument from ancestor diets, it's just a very poor heuristic. It's not very compelling scientifically that these would necessarily be the healthiest diets.
Got you. Thank you so much for that. Question about meat eating, right? Does eating meat mean that you're going to get all of your nutrients?
Meat, you mean eating only meat or
Okay. Yeah, let's start with the extreme. Eating only meat. Can you get all of your nutrients eating only meat?
You can get all of your essential nutrients. You can't get all of your nutrients. So yeah, you can get all of your essential nutrients. You can get them from a variety of dietary patterns. No plants, just plants with a B12 supplement. There's a different combinations where you can ensure all the essential nutrients are present. Then another question is what's optimal long-term in terms of disease risks and optimizing health. And that goes far beyond just what's essential, because normally when we have these discussions on nutrition, we in the West, we're very privileged. We're not worried about making it through the day starvation-wise, right? Or dying of starvation a month from now. What we are mostly worried about is long-term disease risk and health long-term, right? And aging, getting to an older age and getting there as healthy as possible. And just having your essential nutrients is required, but it's not as sufficient. It doesn't necessarily maximize long-term health just because all the essential nutrients are present. That's where all the data comes in and all these boxes to check that we were talking about earlier.
Okay,
does that answer the question? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this was what you were shooting for.
It answers the question and a little bit more, which leads into the next question, because there's this debate, and you see that there's a very vociferous person in the comments who has named herself carnivore, because she is pro meat and she's very, very, very aggressive with it as well, right? Um, so I'm trying to get as much information as we can while we have you on. So you say that you can get the essential nutrients from eating meat only, but you can't get all of your nutrients. What does this mean?
From meat, from animal products, not if you're just eating steaks, you're gonna miss some things. But if you're eating meat and organs and stuff like that, you're gonna get your vitamins from there.
Organs?
Yeah, you'd have to do that to get vitamin C and other
I'm
essential
sorry,
nutrients.
organs? What type of
Yeah,
organs are you talking about? Like
well,
a
like
stomach?
liver and thymus and things like that.
This is what they have people out there eating the livers of animals and the
Oh yeah,
thymus.
it's pretty common. I've seen. My mother used to feed us chicken soup with like chicken liver and chicken heart in it when we were kids. So it wasn't something unusual.
Well.
But
New meaning to eat your
yeah,
heart out. My gracious.
yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Listen, so look, you're Brazilian. The people in the comments are arguing about whether or not you eat meat. If there's anybody who's been to a Brazilian restaurant, the one thing that they don't have is a lot of vegetables. Are you
Yeah,
are you a meat eater, Dr. Gill?
I avoid it, but I avoid it mainly for the environmental aspect. So especially red meat. I haven't eaten red meat in a long time, but I always make sure that I specify it's not that I think that having some red meat once in a while is necessarily going to harm your health. It's, in my case, when you're asking me directly, it's mainly the environmental aspect that I think is crucial,
So
because I can
you're talking about
explain the logic,
greenhouse
but
gases and stuff like that?
yeah, when you look at the sustainability and environmental data, the impact of the carbon footprint of producing red meat is exponentially larger than even most of the other animal foods.
Really?
And so for that reason, I try to eschew red meat as much as I can. I'm not super rigorous. I wouldn't label myself as a vegan in all rigor, but I try to favor plant foods, and then I try to avoid animal foods more than the health data indicates, because of these externalities, in particular, in my case, the environmental impact.
That is interesting. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
That must be very difficult at Brazilian family gatherings. That must be difficult.
Not really, because I've gotten used to it. I have no problem. Most of my friends eat meats and
Oh,
eat all these things, and I go to restaurants with them. It doesn't bother me at
you
all.
just bring your salad in your glass dish.
No, I always find something to eat in restaurants, and
Really?
sometimes, yeah.
Oh,
And if
okay.
the restaurant doesn't have something that's completely plant-based, I'll eat something with a little bit of cheese occasionally. Like, I'm not, super obsessed, but I try to favor these foods that are lighter on the environment since I can.
Interesting. I do want to pick your brain. I know we've been on longer than I said that we would be, but I just want to pick your brain on the intestinal
Mm,
controversy with red meat. There are people who
okay.
say that it putrefies inside of your guts. Then there are other places that say it's plants that putrefy inside your guts. So what does the science say? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know specifically about the putrefying aspect. I think the concern has to do with colorectal cancer. Is that what normally when people talk about the intestine and meat
Okay.
consumption?
Well, we can go
Um,
there. We can go there.
uh,
So, do you see, okay, in terms of the intestinal impact of meat eating,
hmm.
is it beneficial? Is it not? Is it better to eat vegetables for a cleaner colon? What are your thoughts on that?
Long-term wise, a consumption of a large amount of red meat is associated with more colorectal cancer. Now, there's qualifiers to that statement. The first qualifier is that this is mostly observational evidence. So it's bag two, if you remember the bags, bag two, and then bag one. Mechanistically, we also have some understanding of how that might take place, but it's extremely difficult to have data for bag three for cancer, right? Because you can't split people randomly and feed them piles of meat for 30 years and see if they get cancer. It's just not doable. So it's the type of evidence that is suggestive, but the level of confidence is not the same as for, say, the effects on cardiovascular disease, for example, where we can conduct a different type of experiments. But the suggestion is there. The words of the World Health Organization is that we're talking about unprocessed red meat, right? Like steaks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, their words is that it's probably carcinogenic, but it's not certain, and not, that's the wording they chose. Whereas for processed red meats, the degree of certainty is higher. They say it's a definite carcinogen. It's an accepted carcinogen.
When you say processed, you're talking about like bacon.
Yeah, bacon, cold meats, beef jerky, stuff like that. Yeah, sausage, hot dogs.
Wow.
There's another qualifier I should probably make, because people bring this up and it's relevant.
Yeah.
People who have certain gastrointestinal conditions sometimes have an intolerance to a lot of plant foods, and I've had people in my family who have gone through that. And when they have those conditions, a lot of times, if they remove a lot of plant foods and consequently start eating more animal foods, they can see an improvement in their gastrointestinal symptoms. So this generates a lot of controversy, and people get very angry when you talk about this type of long-term data, because their personal experience is one of improvement of very debilitating symptoms when they remove the plants or when they reduce the plants. So I have entire videos on this, but basically my mother and other close family members have gone through similar situations where they had to go on elimination diets to handle the symptoms initially. And then after that, they went on a phase of reintroduction, and they were able to reverse their disease, or let's say their symptoms were greatly diminished, or in some cases went away. But so it's important to qualify that if you have an underlying issue, it's possible that you have.
So you're talking about something like Crohn's or something like that?
Yeah, like IBD, IBS, so inflammatory bowel, irritable bowel, SIBO. These types of imbalances can oftentimes manifest with intolerances, and so people can see this discrepancy between their personal experience and the data pertaining to the majority of the population.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much for that. So then, follow-up question: a person who eats only plants and vegetables, only vegan diet, can they be healthy?
If the vegan diet is properly designed, yes, the data indicates that they can be. The problem with saying vegan is it only tells us what the person is not eating, right? It doesn't tell us what the person is eating.
Okay.
They're eating
plant-based diet.
Yeah, I think some people call it whole food plant-based or something like. There's different designations, but so you could be vegan and eat a lot of junk food, for example, right? You could be vegan and eat an enormous amount of saturated fat and an enormous amount of sodium. So a vegan diet could be extremely unhealthy. But when people ask me that question, I assume they're thinking of the vegan diet, with a lot of unprocessed plants, a lot of fruits and vegetables and legumes and things like that. And that, in all likelihood, yes, can be health promoting in the long run, provided a few things are in place. We talked about the B12, absolutely essential. A source of B12. There's a couple of other caveats. Vitamin D is another caveat. There's a few other things. A diversity of plants in order to get enough calories and enough protein. You can, in all likelihood, get all the protein you need, at least for most people. There are specific categories that might require more attention, but from a diet with the diversity of whole plants. So make sure you include some legumes like beans and lentils, some nuts, some different types of.
So if you had to compare them side by side, a person only eating plants and a person only eating meat, which diet do you think, for overall health promotion, which diet do you think would promote better health?
Depends on the individual, but because of those cases those qualifiers that I made. In general, between those two, you would advise, if the person is healthy and doesn't have an intolerance, you would advise a diet that is plant-rich. Whether it's plant-exclusive or not is a personal choice, but in general, you would always advise a diet that contains a substantial amount of fruits and vegetables.
Why?
As long as there is no intolerance that needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Why? Why do people need fruits, vegetables, and those things? Why? Why do we need that?
The health data, both observational and interventional, indicates best outcomes when a diet contains is plant rich.
Why?
The mechanistically, you mean?
Yeah, what is it about plants that people need?
Ah,
Plants,
okay.
fruits, what do we need? If we can get all of our essential nutrients from meat, why do we need plants?
So, for example, there's different reasons, different mechanistic candidates. For example, the types of fat in whole plants tend to be more unsaturated, and those are better for cardiovascular health in general. They lower cholesterol and ApoB, which is a particle that causes atherosclerosis. And so unsaturated fats tend to lower those. Saturated fats tend to increase those. So that's one difference between a diet that's very animal rich versus a diet that's very plant rich. Fiber is another component that has a multitude of effects, both at the level of intestinal health, at the level of cardiovascular health, at the level of lipid levels, at the level of glucose metabolism and insulin resistance. So there's different components in plants that are thought to have different effects. And that's probably why a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables tends to be better for lower disease risk in the long run.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So what are the nutrients that we cannot get from a meat diet, since you said that it has the essentials? What are the non-essentials? What does that mean?
Well, fiber, you can't get fiber from meat. Phytonutrients, there's thousands of nutrients that fall under the umbrella of phytonutrients that you can't get. Certain antioxidants that are only present in plants. So yeah, there's a lot of them. And some of those appear to provide a net benefit. But I always like to put this in context that the real important data that compels us to form an opinion based on the health effects of foods is what we call the outcome data, the actual effect of different dietary patterns. The effect of individual components is kind of ancillary. It piggybacks and it can increase our confidence a little bit, but by itself, it's not a very strong argument unless there is data demonstrating the effect of these individual nutrients on health. Does that make sense?
No, you lost me.
No. Okay.
Because I thought we were talking about phytonutrients, and then we got into ancillary, and I didn't know
the reason I'm making this. Yeah, the reason I'm making this parenthesis is because there's a lot of confusion around individual nutrients. And like the lectins, for example, would be a good example. People will say, well, lectins, here's an experiment showing harm of lectins, so we should avoid plant foods then. And here's a benefit of, for example, of heme iron is better absorbed, so we should all be eating lots of meat. And these things make sense contextually. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is, what is the net effect of a dietary pattern on health?
Oh, you mean overall?
The individual effect of the components is a bit more speculative, and it's just weighs less than looking at what happens to a human, a living, breathing human, on different dietary patterns. That's the strongest evidence we have.
And the strongest evidence shows that we need to have fruits and vegetables in our diet, no matter what.
Well, we don't need them. But the composite of the evidence indicates that a diet that contains plant foods tends to have lower risk of cardiovascular disease, lower risk of cancer in the long run, lower risk of gastrointestinal diseases. Again, there's some exceptions. People have specific conditions. But in general, for humans, that's what the evidence is strongly and consistently indicating. Yeah.
Got you. I have one last question, and I'm going to take 3 questions from the audience, okay? My last question is, why do I read a guy who was vegan say that he got blood sludge, that his blood, this is what, it sounds stupid now that I'm saying it.
What does he mean by blood sludge?
That his blood was not moving. It was sludged because he was a vegan. and he had to start chomping on meat in order to be healthy again because he was dying.
Okay.
This is
Um, we'd have to ask him what he means if there was some blood work that he did that.
He said he had sores. He had sores on his body that wouldn't heal.
Okay.
He said
Um,
he had sores
yeah.
that wouldn't heal. His blood was sludged. He was dying, and then he said he started
Mm.
eating meat. His sores healed. You know what? I feel foolish saying this, but you've
That's,
never heard of anything like this?
I've heard every anecdote on the internet at this point. Um, and that's the problem with anecdote. The anecdotes are important for the individual who experienced them, right? If I eat peanuts and if I go into anaphylactic shock, I should pay attention to that. I'm not going to ignore it just because it's an anecdote. The problem is taking an anecdote and then trying to extrapolate an overarching scientific fact. That's where we make mistakes. So we'd have to look into his case. So it's relevant for him and it's relevant for the doctors that work with him. Clinically, it's very relevant. You're not going to ignore his situation, but you're going to investigate.
Right. I
On
got
an,
you.
on an, on an individual basis, you're going to investigate. Was he getting
Got you.
B12, right?
Mm.
Is there some underlying issue? Are there other factors, other confounders that cause these problems that were not diet related? Or is there something about the way he was doing it that indeed caused the problem? All possible,
you.
all things to investigate on a case by case basis.
Got you.
But
Thank you. Somebody said he needed to use condoms.
all right, STD, yeah. Well, it's a joking comment, but I think it makes sense. Like you would investigate all the other variables in his life, right?
Because he did sound like he had some problems.
Right. You would rule out other conditions. Exactly.
Okay. Well, you know what? Okay, wonderful. So we're going to grab 3 questions from the comment for the good doctor, and then we're going to let him go. Hopefully we can have him back another day with some of the other pressing questions that people have in the audience. Oh my goodness. As well as hopefully we can have you come back and take some phone calls for the people who have questions.
Sure.
One young lady said that she wanted to know about living or cutting out oils in cooking, salt and sugar, and
Okay.
whether or not that would have a long-term beneficial effect on overall outcome of health.
So for salt, moderating salt has an overall benefit in blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. You don't necessarily need to go to zero unless you have high blood pressure to begin with. You might want to be stricter, but in general, the evidence indicates that being under it's like 2.3 grams a day of sodium, which is about 5 grams of salt. So it's like a spoon or two in that range. It's not much more.
Like a teaspoon of salt a day?
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
And the other thing that the salt, most salt that we consume actually comes from processed foods. Most people in our society are getting most of their sodium from different things that have salt added to them, not the salt that they add in the kitchen per se. And also when we eat out, also tends to be pretty salty. So basically, to answer her question, moderating salt is generally beneficial. Oil is variable. Oil generally has health promoting effects in the literature for liquid vegetable oils. But the caveat is that it's very calorically dense. So if you are consuming a lot of oil, you want to pay attention to your total caloric intake. You can have a diet with oil that maintains a healthy body weight. You just have to be aware of the total calories. But oil itself is not a detrimental food. When we're specifically talking about olive oil, for example, canola oil, sesame seed oil. A lot of these oils get a bad rep on the internet, but the truth is the majority of the strongest evidence we have points to benefits across the board for health,
Really?
for consumption.
What's that? So interesting. I'm so confused now. Nonetheless, there's another question, and an S Shark says, I have such cravings for meat sometimes. It's like undeniable. does this mean that I'm lacking in iron or other nutrients, essential
It's
nutrients?
possible. It's possible. It could also be habit. There's several possibilities. But if here's what I would say is if you have a diet that isn't satisfying you at all, that's probably not going to be sustainable long term. So I would not advise going on a diet that you think is optimal, but leaves you craving and unsatisfied and not feeling well. You're not going to be able to sustain it. So there's no point. Most of the benefits of healthy diet are observed in the long run, years and decades. So if you're trying to cut back on whatever it is, if you're trying to cut back on sugar, if you're trying to cut back on a lot of meats that you want to moderate more, one idea that might work for some people is to phase it out, right? Little by little. Don't try to do the jump, because a lot of people, the habit and also the peer pressure and the cultural constraints will sometimes work against you. So little by little, phasing it out. And then also, as you phase it out gradually, you can experiment with foods to replace it, so that you find things that work for you, that you can implement on a regular basis and that you enjoy. And that's a more sustainable process than just trying to jump overnight from one dietary pattern to the exact opposite. And a lot of times that generates problems. If not physically, psychologically, it's a much harder leap.
Interesting. Thank you so much for that. My question for Shark is when you're craving the meat, are you craving meat with no salts on it? Are you just craving plain meat, raw meat? What type of meat are you craving? Are you craving fried meats?
It's a good question.
So because if you do satisfy your craving of meat without the salt and seasonings on it, does that satisfy you on the inside? Or are you craving the salt, the comfort? What is it that the oils, the fats, what is it that you're craving? You could also have some sort of, have you heard of like intestinal, like candida, like parasites that make you crave fried foods? Have you heard of that? Is that real?
Not specifically that craving. I haven't heard of that. No, I mean parasites in the intestine, yeah, but not specifically fried food craving. I haven't heard that. No.
Candida that makes you want sugar and fried foods. You haven't heard that?
I think a lot of us have that bug then.
Okay. All right. Let's look for the last question. Let me see who has the last question. Oh, they want to know which type of oil is the best to use. You did say that some plant oils are saturated, right? Is that possible?
Yeah. Coconut oil and palm oil are highly saturated.
So that's not good. Saturated is not good. Unsaturated is better, right?
Overall, yes. I mean, if people are having a little bit of coconut oil here and there, if their lipids are good, I wouldn't worry too much. But if that's your staple and you're lathering things with coconut oil and you have a lipid issue, know that replacing that with a more unsaturated form will probably lower your lipids.
I thought coconut oil was a medium chain fatty acid that actually took cholesterol out of your body. Is that not true?
It raises cholesterol. So the cholesterol itself, the cholesterol level is not the crux of the issue. It's the level of the lipoproteins that carry cholesterol. That's the problem. And those very saturated oils tend to raise that. So
really?
A very high amount of regular intake of those oils can raise ApoB. LDL cholesterol is an indicator of the level of ApoB. It's like the check engine light on our dashboard. It lets us know that there's a problem, but it's not the root of the problem, if that makes sense.
So you can have high lipids and low cholesterol.
Cholesterol is a lipid, but you could have your cholesterol could be a little above normal, and you could be fine, not be at higher risk of cardiovascular disease if those lipoproteins, those particles that carry the cholesterol, are not more concentrated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I thought that for some reason I thought that coconut oil was the best oil to eat, but now you're saying the evidence says otherwise in terms of lipid profile raising.
Yes.
So which is the best oil to eat, to cook with, and to eat?
All of these unsaturated plant oils are health promoting. There's no clear evidence of superiority between olive oil, canola, sesame seed oil, whatever is your preference. And you don't need oils in your diet. That's another thing that we could add in. Oil is not essential. So people who don't appreciate oil, who don't enjoy oil, who don't have the habit of eating oil, you don't have to. You can eat whole forms of fat if you want. There are certain specific essential fats. We have essential fats. LA and ALA are two essential fats, but you can get them from whole forms of fats like nuts and seeds, for example. And fatty fish is another good source of long chain omega-3s.
Oh my goodness. I'm confused. I thought I knew, and then now you're saying that what I thought I knew, and then people in the comments are saying you're wrong and this, that, and the other. And I just, there's so much information swimming out there. I just don't know what to.
That's good.
But you're saying that there's no difference between corn oil and olive oil? That just doesn't feel right.
A lot of things don't feel right, and then the data says something, and we have to accept it. That's my daily life. I change my mind all the time. If the data changes directions, I change my mind. But if you
oil? How can corn oil compare to a natural expressed oil? There has to be a difference between cold pressed and raw, and there has to be, because corn oil is like, okay, corn oil is not natural. Like Wesson?
Yeah, neither is. I mean, no oil is natural, right? They're all an extracted fraction of a fruit or a seed. But if you prefer olive oil, that's totally fine. Or if you prefer no oil, that's also fine. There's just no evidence of clear superiority between these polyunsaturated fats, the different sources of liquid vegetable oils.
Oh my God. You know what? I'm going to have to start looking at some studies on this, my friend, because I cannot, not canola, not corn oil.
Canola has been,
margarine
canola specifically.
Too? Hydrogenated fats too, all right?
What's that?
Hydrogenated, the margarine.
Oh, no. Trans fats are detrimental, yeah.
Oh, okay. At least
trans fats raise cardiovascular risk, yes.
There was someone who had a last question about fermented foods, but she just said, ask you about fermented foods, but there was no question.
Fermented foods are generally recommended by people who focus on the microbiome, the microbiome researchers. Yeah, it seems they have a beneficial effect on our microbiome, and they are a good source of probiotics.
Wow.
Things like tempeh and kimchi and that type of stuff are generally sauerkraut. Yeah, sauerkraut. The problem is it's very salty, but if it's in reasonable amounts, and so is kimchi, I guess. But yes, that is generally recommended.
All right. Well, you know what, Dr. Gill, tell the people how to find you and how to get information and how to battle wits with you. How do they do that?
They can check out our YouTube channel, Nutrition Made Simple. That's where most of our content is shared. I'm on Twitter. The handle is @NutritionMadeS3, and we discuss a lot of nutrition stuff on there as well. And I have a Facebook page. If you search on Facebook, Nutrition Made Simple, or my name, you'll find our page. The page is called Nutrition Made Simple as well. So we normally share the new videos and some new studies that come out. I often share them there as well. So those are the main social media platforms.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out. This conversation left me with more questions. You're quite the controversial figure because you don't seem to pick a side. You seem to focus on the data. And now people are saying, screw the data. I don't know what to
Well,
say. Well,
people are free to do that. We say that often on the videos. Like, here are the studies. You're welcome to use them however you see fit, or you're welcome to ignore them. And the science is not prescriptive. You're welcome to use the information however it fits your life or not.
yeah. Oh, you know what? I selfishly want to ask one last question about a little bit something that I thought was controversial. 6 meals a day or 1 meal a day? Which one is healthier? What does the data
Um, I,
show?
yeah, I haven't seen any clear evidence of a benefit of 1 meal a day, except that people who eat 1 meal a day tend to eat less overall. That's the caveat. But if you're asking if I eat the exact same amount of food, but spread it out in 6 meals versus eating 1 meal, and assuming they're all healthy foods, yeah, there might be an effect of this, that residual circadian effect that we talked about, which is now uncertain as well. So eating the food, this is what I said in the original OMAD video that we made a couple of years ago, is I recommended eating earlier in the day. And now it's a little bit less certain thanks to the study that just came out.
Right, but I'm saying
But
people have this debate. Should we eat 6 small meals or, 3 meals or 1 meal? Is it better because of the insulin spiking from always eating? What
mhm.
does it say? What does the data say, Doc?
The
Please.
data says that raising insulin within normal physiological uh, glucose and insulin elevation doesn't have a major effect on weight gain. So they've done direct comparisons between foods with the same amount of calories, some with more carbohydrates and some with more fat. And there was a clear difference in insulin secretion, and sometimes no distinction in terms of weight loss, and sometimes he went in the opposite direction. So insulin does play a role, very important metabolic role, but it doesn't seem to be a major determinant of weight gain. Yeah, that's what
What
these
about health gain? Which one is healthier?
there is no clear
Really?
benefit of eating 6 meals a day versus 1 meal a day. If both are healthy foods, both could be health promoting.
So
I
it
don't think there's
doesn't
a
matter
clear,
if you spike your insulin levels 6 times in a day?
no, there's an overall effect, but there's no clear data that 6 spikes versus 1 spike. Do
Really?
not entertain him no longer. I like the comments. You got a lot of assertive people. What can I do or eat to increase brown fat? Yeah, there's a lot of controversy around that, but most of the rigorous data that has come out over the last couple of years indicates that a diet that spikes insulin more doesn't necessarily lead to weight gain. And in fact, in some experiments, it goes in the opposite direction. You can have more insulin secretion and have more weight loss. Yeah, it wasn't well received in a lot of
All right.
internet camps, but
So
that's
they want me to talk to Dr. Berg, but he has a video where he actually debunks one of Dr. Berg's videos. So take that with your
we
grains
did
of salt.
well. I'm not surprised that it's coming up because it was also on my channel. People kept asking to look at this one video from Dr. Berg, and I honestly didn't know much about him beforehand. And then we eventually did it. We got so many requests from independent viewers saying, "Can you please talk about this video? Can you please talk about this video?" So we went over it. People are welcome to check it out and see what they think.
It's an interesting video. It was about cholesterols and the fats that you were just talking about, the lipid levels. And they're saying I
Right.
should talk to Dr. Fong, who is the expert on intermittent fasting, who swears by it. This is what I'm saying. This is so confusing. But listen, Dr. Carvalho, thank you so much for coming out and spending this time with us today. We really appreciate it. But you see, I feel like you have created more questions. Like I feel like we talked for this whole hour, and I don't feel like I know anymore. I feel like I know less. I do. I feel like I know less because what I thought I knew, I don't know now. Now you're saying 6 meals a day, insulin doesn't
Mm,
matter. Autophagy is in animals, not in humans. The East study, the China study it was not conclusive. Dr. Gill, give us some closing words
okay,
for where it is that
let
we are
me, let
emotionally.
me,
I said, give us some closing
so
words for where
let
we
me
are
end on a,
emotionally. Yes. Hmm.
yeah, let me extend an olive branch. Uh, I think what we've basically discussed were ideas and types of data that you had heard. And some of those are not particularly compelling, but we're not really disagreeing on the fundamentals of what is a healthy diet. And that is basically what people need to focus on, right? So if you're eating a diet that isn't crazy high in ultra processed foods, if you're eating your fruits and vegetables, whether you want to eat some meat or not, some eggs or not, if it checks all those main boxes, if there isn't a crazy high amount of sodium, right? If the saturated fat isn't off the charts, if those things are in place, does it really matter if it's through autophagy or not? Not really. When you go into the kitchen, is that going to be focusing on autophagy? Is that going to help you? Not really, right? It's focusing on what the dietary pattern looks like. That's what's going to hit the main buttons, and that's what's been shown in the literature. That's going to maximize your health long term and minimize disease risk. So that's what I normally focus on. Does that provide some clarity and some reassurance, or not? Not really.
It does, but now you have me wondering which is the best oil to fry my foods in. Because if it doesn't matter, I'm gonna start eating fried foods again.
Well, I'm not against fried foods. I wouldn't recommend deep frying foods as a staple of the diet, but sauteing them
Okay. You
is
know what?
fine.
Listen, thank you so much. I don't think you don't believe in the alkaline diet then. You don't believe in that.
Foods can change the pH of some compartments, but not really the pH of your blood. The pH of your blood is relatively stable. It's maintained in a tight physiological window. So eating these foods is not going to dramatically change the pH of your blood. Otherwise, you'd have metabolic issues. You'd go into acidosis or very very problematic issues. So it changes the pH in your gut, for example, but not in your blood. There are better heuristics, I would say, to choose foods than the effect it might have on our blood pH.
Okay, but gut pH is good. Lower the gut pH and you'll be
No, the gut the stomach pH is already plenty low.
okay.
It's like you have like an extremely acidic pH in your stomach, and you want that in order to digest your food. You don't want to raise that too much.
You know what? We have to have you back. We have to have you back so we can talk about alkaline and oils and everything else because I know this video is going to bring up more questions. So, Doc, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming out and helping us with with debunking some food myths and bringing some clarity about health overall and some of those things because there's a lot of information out there. So thank you. We appreciate you coming out. Thank you. I will touch base with
Thank
you
you for having me.
afterward. So I know it's pretty late where you are. So we'll debrief tomorrow.
What's that?
We'll debrief tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for coming out. All
Thank you.
right.
Take care.
So my goodness. Whew, listen, my mind is blown. I appreciate all of you for coming out. Today's conversation was an amazing conversation where we got so many of our questions answered so generously that we went over time. And so listen, what I want you all to do is I'm going to put his links in the description. He has a lot of amazing videos. Go check him out and watch his videos and take a look, because when he does his videos, he also provides links to the studies that he gathers his information from. So take a look at the data firsthand yourself and see what the data says, because I think that that's important to look into it yourself, because there's a lot of different information out there that is saying a lot of different things. We did get some apples that came in during the broadcast, so I'm going to grab those apples real quick. What is that I hear? Hey, 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 hey. Listen, I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. Tia, oh wow. Tia sends 0.005034 Bitcoin, and she says 1010, shout out to the Real Tech Squad. People are out here false claiming. LOL, love you, Tanya. Just wanted to tune in to run up your numbers. I'm on my way to work and will listen once I get there. Thank you so much. And this was a great conversation too. So we definitely have a lot to talk about amongst ourselves. Green Vegan sends $10 for some pineapple. You know what? Let me go. I'm going to take this to the grocery store and get me some organic pineapple. Thank you. I've been eating organic since I've been back. And so today I